Hello, and welcome to another LinkedIn Live. My name is Paul Pharma. As usual, I'm going to give a couple of minutes for people to join while we're here. And I'll give you a bit of background. So, I've been in the pharmaceutical industry now 4 decades, 40 years. Can you believe it? It's quite a long time. I started in microbiology. Then I went into QC, QA. QC and QA were actually based in production, which was interesting for me. I've been an auditor now. I always forget how many years it is. It's nearly 30 years. About 27 years, I think, I've been auditing suppliers. I've been a QP, qualified person, named on UK and EU licenses now for, 2004? That's 22 years. Yeah, 22 years I've been named. And I still am. I'm still a practicing qualified person. I've started my own consultancy back in 2011, Paul R. Pharma Limited. I started another one. What was it? 2019, Pharma Quality Services. And more recently, I've launched an academy, Academy Pharmaceutical Excellence. You can see the logo at the top right. The intention for the academy is to be able to share, the knowledge. What I find in the pharmaceutical industry is people get trained in the SOPs, but they don't always get trained in understanding the application of the SOPs or what it means to the industry, what it means to the products, but more importantly, what it means to the patient. And I do think it's an excellent career choice, but there's lots of different areas that you can be in. So I talked last time. Which one did I talk about last time? Sorry, I can't remember now. Quality, I think. And this time we're talking about regulatory affairs. Regulatory affairs is an interesting one because it's quite niche. Because once you've got into the pharmaceutical industry and regulatory affairs, you really maintain your knowledge in the regulations, and you start probably with a single market and then you expand. So it's an interesting one, and it's quite sought after, I suppose, is probably the best way to put it. So I think we've done our 2 minutes intro there now, and we're going to go on to the content. So we're talking today about breaking into regulatory affairs, and I'm going to go through, I put it as a roadmap for pharma professionals. We're going to talk about how you do it, how you approach it, about what the opportunities are. And if you do have any questions, please do ask them in the comments. I've decided I'm going to answer comments afterwards every time now, because sometimes they come through and well, not very often, to be honest. It used to be easier. I don't know why. So do add the comments at the bottom if you've got any questions, or you're welcome to contact me directly, or you can email. I'll give you the email at the end of the session as well. So we're talking about breaking into regulatory affairs, a roadmap for pharma professionals. So why would you want to be in regulatory affairs? Well, really, to get a product onto the market, you have to have a license. You have a site license, you have a product license, you have all other, the site license, product license, and you have a lot of other activities that go on that are actually really managed by the regulatory affairs team. It sits at the central point. Without the regulatory affairs, without getting the licenses, without doing the applications, without doing the variations, without doing the audits as well, you get nowhere. So when you want to move into the pharmaceutical industry, when any company wants to join the pharmaceutical industry, they have to start with licensing. To do the licensing, you need regulatory affairs. So every single company, every pharma companies, the startups, the clinicals, the full-scale manufacturer, everybody needs regulatory affairs. So it does sit at the heart of the pharmaceutical industry. And people that are in regulatory affairs need to understand the science. They need to understand compliance. They need to understand business. If you don't understand business, then you won't know why one product goes forward and another product doesn't. If you don't understand the regulations, you won't know why sometimes they're rejected. If you understand the NICE assessment criteria, then you'll understand the commercial criteria to allow a product to get to market and what you need to be able to approve as part of the application. The application, of course, that the regulatory affairs team assemble and submit and manage the response. Now, talking about response, that's one thing that comes to mind. So in quality, you work with the regulatory affairs team. As a QP, I work with regulatory affairs all the time because I need to understand the licensing, the license that's in place for a specific market, a specific product for a specific market that I'm about to release. And if I have a question, I ask regulatory affairs. So they have quite a holistic overview. Every medicine needs regulatory approval before it is allowed to be manufactured and shipped to patients. So there's always going to be a demand for somebody that understands the regulations, but also the process for submitting an application to demonstrate that you meet the regulations and to get a license. It's a critical role. It's important not just that you think, well, I can just go get that job. No, you can't. You need to understand the market first. You need to understand the industry first, should I say. There is a growing demand because there's an increasing complexity of the regulations. So there's a lot of opportunities. And when you've gained the knowledge, you will find that it's a rewarding career. So it's quite a nice one to get into. But what do they actually do? Well, product life cycle. What is a product? What is the product life cycle? Well, it's all the way from initial conception, where you think about, well, I'd like to develop this product. And then you actually develop the product, and then you apply for the license, you put it on the market, you're selling it for a period of time. And throughout that life cycle, you'll be doing your variations. And you get to the end of its life cycle and nobody else really wants it anymore. And you delist it, you retire the product. So regulatory affairs, it participates all the way throughout. They interpret the global regulatory requirements all the way throughout the process. They'll also do the submissions for the license applications. They'll maintain the marketing authorizations once it's actually on the market. But also, they need to be able to understand how to communicate with the regulatory authorities. Now, this is an interesting one because it's not just about regulatory affairs. Often you'll get a question that's not directly relevant to the regulations. You might get a question that's been asked by an inspector. An inspector might ask you about the good manufacturing practice application of the information that you've submitted. Now, when you do that, you have to then coordinate the submissions and the responses with the other team members that give you the information, because you don't have all the information yourself. It doesn't just come off the website. It comes from your team as well. It comes from the company. Now, there are a range of different areas, and I've broken it down into 6, but there is a bit more stratification, but I think this will give you enough of an idea to decide whether you actually want to be somebody that joins the regulatory affairs within the pharmaceutical industry. So CMC, I would say, is the core of the license. Chemistry, manufacturing, and controls. It's about how we make the product. It's about the analysis. It's about the preparation. It's about the controls that you have in place. Now, coordinating that in a format that meets the electronic common technical document based on the information you received from other departments is quite a feat. There's quite a lot of work to go into that. Then you have clinical trials. The trials information when you're doing your original application for a product. Yes, you still have your CMC documentation, but the approach that you have to use has to meet the requirements of the regulatory authority that you're submitting to. Now, that's an important point because different authorities like different approaches. So, for example, the product type. Now, you've always got an option of different dosage forms. And some countries prefer suppositories, others prefer tablets, others prefer capsules as examples. Now you can use one product with all three formats, but then you also need to consider the packaging of those different formats. Some will like them in alu, like a foil packaging. Others will like to see them in a blister, and others would prefer to see them in a tub. And it also relates back to the business requirements, because the regulatory authorities not only think about the science, they also think about the price, how much the reimbursement's going to be. Then we move on to labeling and artwork. Now, this is a specialist field of its own. You want to look at the compliance for the product labeling to ensure that the product actually meets the regulatory requirements, but it also meets the safety requirements, because it's important that people understand the content that's placed on the labels, that it actually warns them what they should and should not be doing, that it's clear, that the text is of the right format, that it's the right size, that it stands out in such a way that they're actually going to be able to use the product properly, to get treated so that it works, but also so that they don't put themselves at risk. Global strategy is one that you'll like to move on to as you get further, more experienced. It's more about, well, if we place this product on this market first and get the initial exposure, and we get probably the larger markets, then we can look at doing the smaller markets afterwards, or alternative markets next. Often you'll find that people start with English, and that simply because there's a larger number of markets where you can do the English, and then you don't have to change very much on the artwork, because of course that's expensive. You'll probably have to just change the license information and the country, no, the name of the location responsible where you're placing it on the market, for example, but not the rest. Then we have regulatory intelligence. So what's that about? Well, it's about what's coming next. Now, if you're in one market, that's quite easy. But imagine you've got your product placed on 50 markets around the world. I did a project once where we had 14 different variations of a single product, just because of the requirements for the different markets. Now, if the regulatory affairs team initially had considered the impact of those 14 different license variants and the ability to manufacture to those different requirements, then they wouldn't have had 14. They'd have actually questioned it and aligned them so they got one variant across all markets. But that hadn't happened. So I joined as the quality specialist, I think they called it at the time, with this project back in, I think it was around early 2000s, maybe 2002, maybe 2003. And it was azathioprine. And we were having to manufacture to 14 different specifications. Now, of course, if something fails to meet the tightest spec, you've always got the alternatives. But we had lots of stock of the looser specs and very little of the tighter specs. And because it was so difficult to actually achieve that, we did the validation work. I actually worked with them to define the strategy to achieve 2 licenses that we could get to. So I worked with regulatory, I worked with manufacturing, I worked with development, I worked with QC, and did a project so that we actually ended up with 2 license variants. There was 2 that didn't overlap, so it was difficult with their specific local requirements to meet those and to have the same product because they were different. But 14 down to 2 certainly helped, and it made it a lot easier for us to place the product on the market, and we were able to supply the stock that we had already. But it takes time. It takes time to do the work to actually demonstrate the equivalence. And then you've got life cycle management. Well, in this context, it's really about post-approval product maintenance. It's not the initial side of it, because we've talked about the clinical side for the development and the CMC for the content. So for life cycle management, you're thinking, well, what's coming next? How's this product progressing? What's the status for the reimbursement? Do we have to apply for the next stage? Do we have to update something so that we get our cover from the perspective of the trademark again? There's all sorts of different aspects to it that come into it. Now, that's the 6 basic areas that I would suggest you think about. But once you do get into them, you will have to understand that there's medical affairs. There's all sorts of things that are related. But this gives you a nice overview and idea to consider whether you just want to do it. Because that's really what we're talking about today. Is it something that might be interesting for you? Who can move into regulatory affairs? Well, it's not the easiest position to get into. You do have to have some experience. It's hard if you've got no knowledge whatsoever, even to just start. So you could be from QA, QC, from the quality team. Manufacturing is good because you've got the GMP understanding, but there's certain criteria that you would have to meet. So your educational background, for example. But you might be able to study that while you're working. Validation and engineering. Validation is a good one because normally the validation team have a good understanding of what's expected already, because they often work with the regulatory teams to make sure that they fulfill the requirements when validating a process. A scientific background is good. Research and development. If you've been in clinical research, well, the obvious one to move into would be clinical. Healthcare professionals, a pharmacist, a QP, medical device manufacturer, biotech. You probably have a harder time getting in if you've been in medical devices, unless you're in regulatory affairs for medical devices. But people in healthcare in general are beneficial to the company, but they often struggle to gain the knowledge. So the company gets the benefit of their knowledge first, and they end up quite often with their own niche role, which gives them a lot of demand within the company, but sometimes it makes it difficult for them to move around. So once you're in, it's useful to get the additional educational training. So what do you need? How can you do your own assessment to consider whether you've got what it needs, what's needed, what skills are needed to make a go of it? Well, the first one, and probably I would say the most important, is attention to detail. The documents that you submit have to be correct. If you make spelling mistakes, it can change the interpretation. If you don't format it correctly, it can cause a problem with the content. If you make a mistake, you might get something registered that you can't even manufacture. Now, wouldn't that be fun? Scientific understanding, I think, is obvious because the technical knowledge is there required for everything you do in regulatory affairs. But it's an essential part of it. Written communication skills. You have to be clear, accurate, not only for the people that are going to read it at the regulatory team, at the regulator, but also for your own team members, for your own stakeholders, so that they understand what you need from them, and actually so that they give you the right information and you don't end up submitting something that's incorrect just because they didn't interpret your request correctly. Critical thinking. Critical thinking is something that's quite core to anybody within the pharmaceutical industry. You need to solve problems in complex environments. You need to think about how you can achieve the goals for all the different countries that you want to launch a product. How are you going to achieve that with maybe one product design, maybe 5 product designs, to actually maximize benefit to the company? So you don't want to launch in, I don't know, Luxembourg, because it's got a tiny population. You normally launch in the top 5 in Europe. You don't launch in the preferred states in the US. You very rarely would launch somewhere like Kenya, because you're not going to get much from it. You're not going to gain the sales. You're not going to get the manufacturing capacity, because it's important to think about volume. Why? Well, the more volume you've got, the lower the cost. You're not going to be profitable until you've got sufficient manufacture to warrant the amount of investment that you make to place the product on the market so that you can actually continue to supply. Because once you've placed it on the market, you have to think about what the rules are, the regulations that don't allow you to take it back off. Now that's an interesting one. You have to continue supply unless there's an alternative. If you've got an orphan drug, you're in it for life. Project management, juggling timelines, submissions, priorities, coordinating with other people, with other teams. That's an interesting part of the job, but it's an add-on. It's not really standalone. Often you'll find that you work with a project manager, but sometimes the regulatory team has to be a project manager as well. And then we have the ability to influence. You have to be able to communicate, influencing across different functions at different levels so that you actually get what you need, so that they understand why you're asking for it, so that you achieve the goals. But the regulatory landscape's not it's not the simplest area to understand. Now, what I've got here is a few different areas that you have to think about, but it's not everything, nowhere near. You need to always think about what's coming next, emerging regulations, because as the regulatory team, you're there to advise everybody within the company about what they should be preparing for, not just what they need to do now. We have the European Medicines Agency, we have the FDA on there, we have MHRA requirements. There's just a few. Not very much. We've got a lot more. So you've got Japan, you've got Australia, you've got Africa, you've got China, you've got other countries that will have their own specific requirements. Even in Europe, you've got India, you've got all sorts of requirements to fulfill, depending on where you're going to place the product on the market. Australia is an interesting one. You have the ICH guidelines, you have the PICS GMP guidelines. There's a lot of different areas that you need to consider, but you have to keep up to date with what's relevant for you, what's relevant for your company, what's relevant for your products. You might want to consider digital health, advanced therapies, AI even, things that are coming next. And they'll be expecting you to be able to interpret what's coming next. I'll give you an example. The ICH guidelines for stability changed. They gave advance warning, and then it came to the point where they're implemented. When they got implemented, they were implemented across the board. All the companies that sign up for ICH. So that was a change in the test parameters for the stability testing. Now imagine you found out about it, and in 5 years' time, you need the data. So you sit there and you go along for 5 years and you say, right, stability team, I need this data because otherwise you can't continue to keep the product on the market. And they say, but that's going to take us 5 years to put together. You have to be forward looking. You have to be able to influence that team to actually place the stability testing on the system and spend the money and the time and the resource and the product before it's needed. Because if they try and do it in 5 years' time, they'll lose the product and they won't be able to do any variations because I haven't got the stability indicating information. So they have to be able to do it in advance, and you have to be able to look forward at the horizon to see what's coming next, to make sure that you're advising and influencing the team members within the company so that they're actually doing the work they need to now. I do find that an interesting part of the role. So how do you go about it? Well, think about your career roadmap. You need to have a foundation. You need to have an understanding, a basic understanding before you start. Industry knowledge. Think about product life cycle. What does it mean? Because when you're going for an interview, they're going to expect you to have done some research and know already. I remember once I applied for a job in development. I didn't think about what I was doing first. Yes, I've been working with the development team, but I understood it. But what I should have done, I should have researched the department. I should have researched in depth about what their approaches were, what their attitude was, what the leading research was now. Because when I got to the interview, the questions were about the knowledge that everybody within their team already had. You need to speak to people. You need to learn. Of course, this was a long time ago, and I've learned since. You need to gain experience. Regulatory documents, cross-functional projects. You might be working with a regulatory person. Sit down and talk to them. Understand what it is that they do. Develop expertise. Common technical document. Electronic common technical document now. Submissions. Regional rules. And of course, grow continuously. If you're going to move on to a strategic role, you need to have your knowledge up at the high level. You have to continue learning. Really, forever. A strong regulatory maybe I should have a drink of water. A strong regulatory career is built deliberately. Start with the basics and build it up. Expand your expertise step by step, usually as you're working, because that's the easiest place to do it. What's a common challenge for a new regulatory person? They don't have the practical experience. Filling the gap between theory and actual practice is hard. It's hard to make the step into regulatory affairs. You need to keep up with change. Legislation's changing faster and faster across multiple regions. Think about how you're going to keep up. Well, you'll learn as you join the industry. Balance priorities. Manage scientific rigor against commercial pressures. That's always going to come up. But how do you know when you start which one's more important? Talk to people, I would say, is number one. And then you have to build confidence with the authorities. You have to be able to actually ask, able to submit, able to challenge, go for meetings with the regulators, with the regulators, and often at a high level. Communication skills are essential. So where do you start? Well, maybe you start as a regulatory affairs associate and build some basic skills, some foundation knowledge. Then maybe you'll get promoted to be a manager and you'll have some associates working for you. Maybe a senior or global regulatory lead, regulatory strategic director, head of reg affairs, maybe even a consultant. Maybe that comes afterwards. These are just examples. It's not a roadmap for you to follow. You need to think about what's available. You need to think about where you want to be, where you think you'll fit in, and what you want to achieve. Not everybody wants to go all the way up. Some people like being the regulatory lead, keeping to what they want. Some people prefer being a director of strategy, so they're not actually doing the implementation anymore. It's your choice. But do go and have a look. Have a look at the advertisements and see what's expected. That's the first thing. That's the way you start, because that's the best way to understand whether you want to do it or not and what you need to do to be able to get in. Your journey could start today. Regulatory affairs isn't about just interpreting the regulations. It's about getting the right product to the right patient at the right time, making sure that they've got the right quality, safety, and efficacy, that the regulation that the license you submit is actually compliant, and that it's suitable for the patient, and that you've proven that. What you need to do is to stay curious, to think, to wonder, understand, build experience. Even before you get into the team, build experience. Talk to people. Go to events. Find out more. And of course, grow your network. Because everybody has to work together in pharmaceuticals, whichever area that you're in. So thank you for joining. I'm going to answer your questions afterwards. I'll do them on the text, on the comments. I do find that's easier now these days. If you want to contact me, we've got the website there, academypharmaceuticalexcellence.com. And of course, you can see that they've got the email address, info@academypharmaceuticalexcellence.com. And we've got my LinkedIn profile. That's probably the easiest place to connect with me. LinkedIn.com, Paul R. Palmer, if you're not already connected. If we are connected, or maybe you're looking at the YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is probably the easiest place to find historical content, because I guess there's around 100 videos on there now. And it's all about pharmaceutical industry. So you may want to go and have a look there as well. So thank you for coming. I hope you found this useful. Now I'm just going to leave this on for another minute, because at the end of it, if I don't, sometimes it messes up for the people that want to watch the recording. So while I do that, I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about what I do. So I'm a pharmaceutical consultant, but it's not just me. I run a consultancy, and we have training. We have bespoke training, and we have online training. You can do it just for your company online. You can do it just for your company in person at your location. We can develop what you need. We can develop your whole program, but we do have programs already set up. So you may find one of those is already useful, and you just join in and subscribe to the existing content. If you want to enhance your career in quality, for example. So I hope you found today's use.